two, two, two. Two, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, one, two. One, two. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. 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 One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, one, two. One, two, 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 one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. Two, two, one, two. One, two, one, two, 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 one, two. One, two, 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 one, two. One, two.
stupid with just one podium sign and put on the other one.
Can you do me a quick favor?
Yeah.
Just hold the mic and talk in it. Podium or at this chair.
At the chair? If I sit in this chair, I may not stand back up. Ooh. Hello. Good?
I kept hearing the sound, my voice there and speakers. I couldn't. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
It's hard when Check, check. Two, two. 1, 2, 1, 2. 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1,
Shalom and welcome. Can I ask everybody to take their seats? My name is Dan Cannell. It is my honor to serve as the president of the board of directors of the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester. I am so proud of the work we do every day. We build an engaging, flourishing, and vibrant Jewish community, helping those in need, fostering connections with Israel and global Jewry, growing the resources to sustain our community, and ensuring the safety and security of our Jewish community. Last May, we celebrated Israel's 75th birthday, 75 years of a Jewish state, something that the Jewish people have yearned for thousands of years. Tonight, we continue our commemoration of Israel 75 and reflect on the strong bond between Israel and the U.S. and Rochester, especially after October 7th. 93 days since October 7th. Thanks to the generosity of a small group of donors, we are thrilled to kick off our Israel 75 speaker series tonight with Asif Zamir. Before I introduce Asif, our Shinshanim, are they here? Hi. Would you mind leading us in a tikva? Well, nobody wants to hear me sing. So, please rise.
You may rise. כל עוד בלבב פנימה נפש יהודי הומייה ולפתי מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא תקוותנו, תקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו את ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו
The battles we face as a people are found globally, nationally, on college campuses, on social media, and in our community right here. The Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester works tirelessly to advocate for Israel and is the leading voice of the Rochester Jewish community. In the wake of October 7th, our Federation amplified our message through media interviews, social media, and small group conversations. We shared updates with our community on the latest information from Israel. We joined together in solidarity, 2,000 people, more than 2,000 people, for a community vigil at Temple Brit Kodesh in the wake of October 7th. More than 200 people from Rochester joined the Jews and allies around the country at the march in Washington in November. And we continue to educate about Israel through our Israel 101 series, presentations, and the list goes on. And through our partnerships with the Israel American Council, Rock Against Anti-Semitism, the JCC, our synagogues, and many other organizations and individual volunteers, we have supported and continue to support community action to raise awareness of the situation in Israel and our steadfast commitment to bringing the hostages home. Again, 93 days. Through, among other things, the empty Shabbat table display at the JCC, stroller and balloon installation at 12 Corners, and the posting of hundreds of hostage posters throughout our community. We combat anti-Semitism by providing Holocaust programming to our community and learning tools for our educators, developing relationships with non-Jewish community through the Levine Center and Jewish Community Relations Council, hosting educational programming for our superintendents of schools and local, regional, state, and federal elected officials, and advocating in school districts for victims of anti-Semitism. We also support Jewish college students with Hanukkah care packages as they struggle with rampant anti-Semitism on our campuses. Tonight, we are privileged to have Asif Zamir join us to share his insights on Israel, the United States, and the aftermath of October 7th. Ambassador Zamir is the former Consul General for the State of Israel in New York and has played a crucial role in this diplomacy and cultivating the strong bind between Israel and the United States. Prior to serving as Consul General, Ambassador Zamir served as Israel's Minister of Tourism after being elected to Knesset in 2019, and he was the Deputy Mayor of Tel Aviv for 10 years. Ambassador Zamir has been a fierce advocate for Israel on a variety of media outlets and fronts. Thank you. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome to the podium Meredith Dragon, the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and Asif Zamir. Thank you.
Squishy seat. Asaf, ooh, that's loud. Can you all hear, I hope? Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the heart of our conversation tonight, and there's certainly an awful lot to talk about, I'd love it if you could share with our audience a little bit about yourself, your career, sort of your background, both in the States and politics, you know, all that good stuff.
Okay. It's usually not how this starts, but okay. I'm still digesting lunch. I landed here. A very nice driver picked us up, and I told him, take us to the finest restaurant in Rochester. And he said, really? I said, no, take us to the Cheesecake Factory. And that's where I had lunch. It was great. But I'm still digesting. It's been 3 hours, and I'm still in the process of getting back to myself and digesting. I am 43 years old. I'm married. I have a daughter. She's 4 in 2 weeks. And I am a 4th generation Tel Avivian, a 9th generation Israeli. So that's almost 250 years. My family goes back in Israel. So you can tell that to the people that are yelling colonialists.
You mean on the street outside?
In the street outside or anywhere. And when I was young, we moved to Florida. I spent a few years in Sarasota. And then we moved back to Israel. I served in the Army and the Air Force. I studied law for my mother. And because she's Jewish, so it was important and to her. And then gave her the degree, started a political platform in Tel Aviv, and ran for city council in 2008. Was elected deputy mayor. That started a political career for me that ended up in me having to resign many times for many different posts for ideological reasons, because I was trying to be I'm saying this now because it's relevant for our conversation, but trying to be a center-left figure in a country that was growing more and more right-wing. So every time that happened, I had to leave certain postings. I ran for mayor and lost, and after that became a member of parliament and the minister of tourism. I was Israel's minister of tourism during COVID. I received Israel with 5 million tourists a year and gave it back with 0 tourists a year. It was a great accomplishment. And I was also a part of Israel's COVID cabinet, which was the group of people fortunate enough to be the ones that needed to decide vaccine decisions, lockdown decisions. It was a very formative experience. And after that, I left in a tragic political event. You can read about it if you want, but it was, I had to resign in protest of Netanyahu. And I left the private sector. I joined the venture capital. And a few months later, the government was overthrown. And the new government offered me, they called me and asked if I'm enjoying my life as a VC guy, and I said no. And they said, well, would you go to New York and represent Israel as consul general? And I've always had, because my mother is American, I grew up in Florida, and I was an American passport holder until I was elected to Knesset, and I had to give that up. I always had a kind of dual identity, and for me to take that position was a true, jokes aside, it was a true calling, because not a lot of people know Israeli society and the American society, understand the importance of the relationship, but also the challenges it's gone through amongst the years. And we moved to New York, and I assumed that position October 2021, and I resigned from that position in the middle of my tenure because the government that appointed me lost an election, and again Netanyahu was elected, and I didn't resign then, but when they started judicial overhaul, I resigned in protest because I found myself in need. I did events like this in shuls in Manhattan where I was supposed to represent the government, but I found myself increasingly criticizing the government. So in fairness, I resigned and went back to Israel. And then, just ending the story, the mayor that I was deputy of for 10 years and ran against 5 years ago and lost, called me up and said, I'm running again for the last time. It's going to be my 6th term, and I'm 80. And how about we reconcile and run together and do a romantic ending to our relationship, and I'll be mayor and you'll be vice mayor, and we'll do the city one more time. I said yes. And then the war started, and the elections were postponed. They were supposed to be on the 30th of October, so that couldn't happen. And then they were moved to the 30th of January. And a week or two ago, the army said that can't happen either, and now they're moved to the end of February. So I found myself unemployed and
And so you came to Rochester.
not in shape enough to fight, deemed by the army. And then I came to Rochester, exactly, to meet you and talk about what's happening in Israel, answer your questions, and talk about the future, possible outcomes, what we're going through and what you're going through.
One more personal question, and then we'll get into the stuff that you just mentioned. But, you know, clearly your political career has been, I don't want to say tumultuous, but there's been stops and starts, and politics in Israel is tumultuous in general, as we all know and love. So what continues to motivate you to take a to have political involvement in Israel and really beyond with the diaspora as well?
It's up till now, it's the only thing that gives me a drive. I don't find drive in other things. So it can be diplomacy, and it can be national level, it can be tourism, it can be legislation, it can be a city, but at the end of the day, it's all public work, and it's all trying to shape the community that we live in. And I think the biggest thing that gives me drive is A, I come from a very Zionist family, and B, I feel I'm part of a group of Israelis which used to be very big and we feel is becoming smaller, that feels that there is a gap, a growing gap between what Israel could be at its best and what it is. And I have a daughter, and Be'ezrat Hashem we'll have more. And I don't have the luxury to, if it was amazing, there's a hotel I've dreamed to open. So if everything becomes amazing, that's what I'm going to do. But until then, as long as I'm relevant and the public deems me worthy, I'm in.
Got it. So I want to share a little bit about our community with you before we sort of dive into the topic at hand. This is a very engaged Jewish community. It's a very strong Zionistic Jewish community. It's a sophisticated Israel community. There's a lot of knowledge here. We have a strong Israeli community here. It's really quite extraordinary for our corner of the world in Rochester that we have such strong support of Israel for our size. There are about 20,000 Jews that live in the greater Rochester community. When the Hamas attack happened on October 7th, we sprang into action immediately. In a month, our federation raised over $4 million towards the emergency campaign efforts, which I think highlights and showcases. As Dan said, we had a vigil on Monday, on the 9th. We had more than 2,000 people come. And I think just those numbers highlight the incredible support that we have of Israel here in Rochester. And I think our community is very proud of our connection and the depth of our connection with Israel and the work that we do together really to support Israel here. So with that, obviously we as American Jews, and many of whom have Israeli family, people who live in Israel, friends. We have a very strong connection with the city of Modi'in, as you saw with our Shinshinim. It's been a very challenging time here, as it's been in Israel with different challenges, and we'll get to some of those in a minute. But what I really want to reflect on with October 7th is, it's been 93 days. We're getting close to the 100-day mark. I think all of us feel like it's still October, in a sense. We haven't quite moved on, and yet there's tremendous work to be done. So can you reflect for us on Israel's response since October 7th, the terrorist attacks, and sort of what's happened since and what you feel like is happening in the country now and where things will go in response to October 7th? And we'll get to the north and the south and all of that as well.
Our response since October 7th, we are still in the middle. So in a way, it looks today different than a year from now when we'll look back at it. Because I want to start out my answer by saying we're still in the process of this. And you've all been covering the war, reading about it and watching TV, and invested $4 million, an amazing amount. And it was very much needed, because this caught, for better or for worse, this caught us off guard. And the beginning of the war, we needed a lot of support. We needed a lot of things. We still do, but the beginning was crucial. And I don't want to get into the military reasons for why we were surprised, but it's a fact that we were surprised. And it caught our country socially in the middle of a huge divide. And if there's anyone that understands divide like we do, it's you guys. And if something happened, God forbid, that would have to make all the hardcore Republicans and hardcore Democrats agree on everything from now on for a period of time, work together and hug each other, that would be very challenging. And in Israel, because of our history, because of our reality, it took 1 second. Everyone bounced back into line, the people. It took politicians 4 days to form the beginning of a unity cabinet. But the first day, the people put everything aside. Like, I don't know any people in the world that can do that. From such a divided point and so much hatred and protests in the street, to say, wait, okay, our enemy thought we were too divided to protect ourselves together. We're going to have to prove to him that when we need to, we can reunite. And it happened in 1 second. And I always say, wherever I speak, that any other country in the world, when war breaks out, it's very hard to find a plane ticket out of that country. So when Ukrainian war started, 15% of Ukrainians fled the country out of fear. Israel is the only country where when war breaks out, it's hard to find a plane ticket into the country, because everyone wants to automatically come back and fight together. Now, 160,000 Israelis came back to Israel from the beginning of the war. The percentage of people that appeared for duty after being drafted was literally over 100%. 100% of people that were drafted came, and more people came and said, we weren't drafted, but take us. And the trauma of October 7th was so strong. And honestly, Hamas keeps fueling that trauma every day. That it's the first time that I remember since I was born that everyone in Israel agrees about something and doesn't really care what the rest of the world thinks. We're always very preoccupied with it, and now we're not. And you know, my assistant Karen is here. She was my chief of staff when I was consul general, and after I resigned, she was fired. But when I come to New York, she still does these things with me out of the goodness of her heart. And she was taking an Uber this morning to LaGuardia. And just this morning, or yesterday night, Hamas released a video of the 4 girls, 18 and 19-year-old girls. That it's really, for me, it was the hardest, as a father to a girl, it was the hardest thing released up till now to look at. It's 4 girls bleeding in captivity, where you understand just by looking at them what they've been through. And on the way to LaGuardia, her Uber was stopped by a bunch of young New Yorkers protesting, globalize the Intifada, free Palestine, and they didn't let her pass to the airport. She almost missed our flight because they closed down all the exits of New York City this morning. Yet, not Palestinians, American-born Americans, not Muslim, shouting, globalize the Intifada, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and other things. And when you look at that picture of those girls and look at these people and understand the gap, you look in their eyes and see that they're not open to listening, and they don't care that those girls are being tortured, then you A, understand what existential threat is. You feel it from inside. And B, you understand that you don't have the luxury to keep convincing these people to let us defend ourselves. So everyone in Israel is pumped up and feeling very righteous about our struggle. And in that aspect, and in that aspect alone, what? Oh, sorry. It's a good thing. We left Gaza in 2005. It was a very controversial move in Israel. Almost half the country thought it was horrible. I was a huge advocate for it. I said, we're not going anywhere. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. We need to find a way to live with each other, and the world won't accept that they don't have sovereignty. And the people that were fighting me said, they don't want sovereignty. They want us gone. If we leave there, we won't be able to protect ourselves. And what happened after Oslo, where they took the guns they were given to protect themselves and started shooting us, is going to happen in Gaza. And me and people like me said, we won't know till we try. And October 7th was 17 years later, saying they used those 17 years instead of to build the Singapore, to build a terror infrastructure of tunnels and ammunition, and to use that to target civilians in Israel, to kill and torture and kidnap and whatnot. And what you're experiencing here with masks off anti-Semitism, we're experiencing in Israel. Because they're suddenly saying for this war things that have never been said out loud before. Right? In political discourse of the world, it's new Palestinians that are saying, we're not fighting to liberate Palestine as a country alongside Israel. We don't want any of you here. We want the whole thing. They haven't said that till now. That's why people that were fighting in America for Palestinian liberation used to say they deserve a state, there should be 2 states. Now they don't say that here. Now they say you should leave, you're European colonizers, you shouldn't be there to begin with, because they have to put themselves the same level as the Palestinian claims. So the minute they say what we did on October 7th, we would do again and again and again until you're not here. And when Birzeit University from East Jerusalem conducts a research and 78% of Palestinians support October 7th massacre, then even if you're Asif Zamir from the center-left, pro-2-state, peace camp, liberal group of people in Israel, there's no real other answer than to say, well, if you're going to keep fighting me, I'm going to do anything in my power to protect myself. Anything in my power. I want to use as least power as needed, but no less than the minimum needed. Because less than the minimum needed means my people dead. And they're making it very hard for us to limit that to a minimum because of the way they're fighting and because they're normalizing the use of human shields. I'll say one last sentence and then we can... We're at a point, and we knew this from the beginning, that we enjoyed amazing international support on October 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. But around the end of the first week, we said that support is going to run out because we're going to get our stuff together, and the world's going to forget October 7th because there's a news cycle, and all the world is going to experience is us fighting back a slower, harder fight to make sure that infrastructure is eliminated. And support will diminish. Thank you. Support will diminish. And at that point, we will need to continue fighting, even though support will diminish. And what we tell the world now is, look, the reason why it's slow, the reason why it's taking very long, and the reason why there are many civilian casualties are all because of Hamas's choice to use its own people as shields. If because of that, we are limited and will not be able to win this war because the world won't be able to contain. Thank you. The world won't be able to contain the bloodshed and the innocent lives that really are innocent and whatnot, and the length. That means using human shields will be normalized. That means it'll be normalized everywhere in the world. It means people that will be using their own civilians and will be willing to sacrifice them will be let off the hook. That won't stop in Israel. That'll move to Europe and to America. It'll move into crime, not just terror. It'll move into drug cartels. It'll move to whatever. It'll be a thing. And it can't be a thing because we can't pay the price of them using their people as human shields. The second thing is, you said we'll talk about the North later, but I want to say one thing about the North. Well, the South, what, the Houthis, South? That's just weird. The Houthis is weird. We don't know what we didn't see that at all coming. It's all Iran. The North is an existential threat for Israel. Militarily speaking, larger than Yemen, of course, and larger than Hamas. We are already at a point where because of their aggression and the trauma in Israel of October 7th, that 130,000 Israelis have been misplaced from their homes and are living in hotels outside of those areas. And they're not going back until we do something constructive to try and get rid of that threat. And that is a very big war. And we're going to need a lot of help for that, and a lot of support, and a lot of ammunition. And the price in Israel, in human lives and infrastructure, is going to be a very high price. But because of October 7th, there is no alternative to that. There's an alternative. The world comes together and makes Hezbollah move up north and fully stop its aggressions, and we don't have to worry about anything. That's the best. But if that doesn't happen, and the chance for that happening is low, then we have to fight it out. And right now, everyone is drafted, everyone is united, we're willing to pay the price, we don't feel we have another choice. A lot of the world is supporting us. 1 year from now, 2 years from now, I'm not so sure that'll be the case. So this is an opportunity in which from the immense trauma we went through, we need to try and turn that around into a regional change. Regional change can't happen with Hamas around and Hezbollah around and with people still having hope that they'll be able to push us out of Israel. Okay, I'll continue with your questions.
So, I think that it's not just that the support has diminished since October 7th. I think we've gone very quickly to denial of October 7th, which is even worse. The people who actually deny that happened. And Deborah Lipstadt, a month ago, had said, it took 20 years for people to start denying the Holocaust, and it took about 2 weeks for people to start denying October 7th. And it adds to our challenge, and I think we have a lot of challenges, but I think one of the biggest is really our demographics. When you take the size of the Jewish world, for all intents and purposes, nearly 50% live in the United States, 50% live in Israel. That combined is 0.2% of the world's population. It's truly an uphill battle when you start looking at what you just described, and when you're talking about Gaza and Hamas and Hezbollah and world opinion. So I think you have a unique perspective, having lived in the United States, worked in the United States, been in your position in the political realm in Israel, and I'm just curious how you think. I don't just think that Israel is more united than ever right now. I think the Jewish world is more united than ever. And it was coming off of a time where I think we probably were never more divided than we had ever been, particularly around things like judicial reform and all kinds of other issues. So, in the Jewish world, when you talk about Israel being united and the Jewish world being united with some exceptions, I guess my question for you is, how best can we enhance, support the diaspora-Israel relationship to strengthen our Jewish world right now in this moment when Israel absolutely needs our Jewish communities in the United States and around the globe to be strong, and we need Israel to be strong, and I don't know that we've ever needed each other more than right now. So,
Okay.
any thoughts?
First of all, Israel is very strong. We're very strong. We're very dedicated to the process. We believe extremely in our righteousness, and we're very strong. I think we surprise ourselves at how strong we are inside Israel and how strong we came back from this. And as to the Jews being 0.2%, that's us. That's our story. It's a unique story, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And we are now, in the past few years, if you look at it historically, and living through some of the best years of Jews in the world since the beginning. And I'm not, I think we're going to have as a people better times and more challenging times. We're going to be up, we're going to be down, but we're always going to be us. And I really believe that we're always going to exist and prevail. Here, there, it can differ, but there's a reason that, there's a reason we're hated, and there's a reason we always prevail. And there aren't many stories in history, and I'm talking about Israel, not about just Jews. Well, about Jews, I say, the world isn't built to really love very successful, very small minorities. You can either be very successful or a very small minority. You're not supposed to be both. And for Israel, and for the Jews looking at Israel, up until 75 years ago, Zionism and Israel were an extremely progressive cause. It was a romantic cause. If you were on the liberal, human rightsy side of the world, you rooted for Jews to have Israel. We're just one of the few progressive causes that succeeded. And the success is huge. If you look at what we've built over in Israel in the past 75 years, out of nothing, it's a wonder. If you look at the challenges around us, if you look at the internal challenges and the demographics, it's a huge wonder. And if you look at the history of American Jewry and its impact on America, it's a wonder. It makes no sense number-wise. And that can intimidate people, and I understand that. But it is true, just like Israel was on the verge of civil war and was reunited by this war, the Jewish community was very divided and was reunited. But that's, in the Jewish community, the smaller thing. In Israel, that's the biggest thing. I believe in the Jewish community, the biggest thing or the most important thing coming out of this Gaza war is the discovery or rediscovery or understanding of the importance of the Jewish identity amongst the younger generation of Jews, meaning some of your kids and your grandkids. Because the older the people in this room are, statistically, the more connected they are to Israel. They know the history, they feel it from the Kishke, they have a cousin in Netanya, they've been bar mitzvah there, and they went to a kibbutz, and they've been through all the wars, and maybe they fought in some. And the parents' generation, the middle generation, fed off that. But the younger generation that I met as consul general really had almost no connection to Israel already. If you're a son of an Israeli family that moved here, it's one thing. If you're head of Jewish Federation and your mom makes you go 3 times a year, that's another thing. But most Jewish kids, if you ask them, what identifies you? Up until a few months ago, it was the sports team they like, the music they like, the thing they do, the person they're dating, the gender, the whatever, a lot. And Judaism, 11th place, Israel, what is Israel? That's the good case. Either what is Israel or Israel is something I hate because it's a social burden on me when I talk with my friends in college. And I understand that, and I can explain that, and I know why it's happened. And when everything is fine, it's very hard to explain a sense of urgency to a 17 or 18-year-old person. And when you don't feel or didn't live through an existential threat, it's very hard to explain that someone should feel threatened. And if you haven't been 50 times to Israel, or 20 times, or whatever, and you haven't been reading the paper about Israel for 30 years, it's very hard to understand it, and to understand your connection to it. So it was virtually impossible, almost for good reasons, for this third generation of kids to be a part of this. And the rising anti-Semitism, or it's not rising, but now that people can showcase it, and it's almost trendy and normalized, and they can shout globalized intifada with a smile as if they understand what they're talking about. I've seen many young Jews, and I'm sure you have too, asking questions. They want to understand. They need to educate themselves. They want to be more involved. This, for that, in that aspect, is an opportunity to take a generation that was almost lost in terms of its Judaism and its relationship to Israel, and to reconnect them. And that, for us in Israel, is a huge objective and an important one. Because I understand the importance of the bio relationship between American or Jewish diaspora and Israelis. And Jewish diaspora usually understands it, Israelis don't. So you can raise money here, and for Israel, they don't know where Rochester is. And I think that is also something that needs to change. But it needs to change from both directions. And if we are in this or under this threat together, and it's together, because, we used to say anti-Zionism is a way of hiding anti-Semitism. And then people said, no, it's not, it's just criticism of your government. But masks off, it's not just that. October 7th would have happened if Shimon Peres was still prime minister. And the people protesting outside here would still be protesting against this, and against us supporting Israel, if it was a left-wing government in Israel. That's the honest, very sad truth. So we have no other option than to reunite and stand proudly in front of that and answer what we believe in.
So since you started talking about our youth and college campuses obviously have been front and center in the States right now. Many of us have students on campus, and it's, it's a different war on another front here to some degree, what we're facing on college campuses and what our kids are facing. And I agree with everything you said, and I guess the question is, how? How can we help shape Jewish life, Jewish identity for our college students? And what do you think the future of, our Jewish students' identity on campus looks like? And what do you think we can be doing with, in partnership with Israel around our college campuses and for our young people?
I think this is an example of a question that I'll probably have a different answer for in a year from now. And I hope I will, because judging from it now and in the past 2 years, it's going to be a very challenging time on college campuses for Jewish people in the forthcoming years. Because there's going to be no room for most of them. There's going to be no openness to listening or to understanding a complex reality. Because Judaism is complex, Jewish history is complex, the relationship between Judaism and Israel is complex. And then having your own set of opinions about other things in the world doesn't always agree with that. So the funny thing is, if you're a pro-Israel person and you try to listen, who's speaking pro-Israel now? A lot of the people that are speaking pro-Israel don't necessarily don't represent your views on any other thing in the world. And that's very confusing, because these are suddenly people that are influential that you never agree with, don't want to agree with, and define yourself by not agreeing with them, and suddenly these are your heroes. Does that mean you have to change and if you're grown up, if you're 60 years old, you have the backbone and depth to explain that to yourself, to your surroundings. Say, no, I can be pro-union and pro-Israel, and let me explain to you how that works together. But when you're 18, that's impossible. And when you're 18 in front of an angry mob and you need to explain that, that's impossible. And when you're presented with the options and people say, look, this is all the things you have to believe in if you want to be pro-Israel, and if you believe in the other things, you can't be pro-Israel. And if you want to be pro-Israel and you don't want to believe in the other things, you can be a third party on campus, which never existed. And it'll be a very small, sad party where only you'll be at. That's a very hard decision for an 18-year-old to make. almost honestly impossible, because the most important thing in college is social life for most people, or maybe for people like me, and maybe you're better than me, but for people like me, and it's very hard to stand in front of that, and the level of ignorance is horrible. And I told, this week there was a paparazzi picture of the daughter of Ben Affleck and Jennifer Gardner. She was wearing a sweater. It was a map of Israel with a picture of a watermelon inside, representing that all of Israel is Palestine, and further than that, saying Jews shouldn't have their own country, basically aren't entitled to self-determination, meaning it's a modern version of anti-Semitism in a way. But if she's wearing that for a paparazzi picture, that no way in hell that if you ask her, and I don't know her, sadly, because I don't know Jennifer Gardner, but if you ask her, what does that symbolize? I bet you she's not going to say, this symbolizes genocide to Jews and I hate Jews and you should kill all the Jews. That's not what she's probably saying. I love peace and I want peace and I want end of violence and this means end of violence, and but that's the great success of the Palestinian campaign. And in America, in one of the biggest and of course the most influential societies in the world, when that becomes a trend, it's impossible to explain the other way around. It's impossible. You have no chance. So the question, there is no answer for that question. It might be for now, and that it might be impossible. You have to reinvent what you think about the whole college experience right now, and what you tell your kids, and what they should, any answer is right. Even if you say, my answer is, I told my kids, don't deal with it, shut up, go study and come back home. I understand that answer as a parent, but I'm not part of the Jewish community in the United States. I know if I was 18 and I knew what I know today, I'd become a very active anti-Semitism and pro-Israel activist. But it's easy for me to say from my age of 43 and living in Israel. But that's the only activist option I can see.
I think we have to reclaim the watermelon.
We have the orange.
All right. So I do want to go back to Israel and sort of the global stage where we began our conversation a little bit. And we started talking about Hezbollah in the north. At the same time, Israel was on the verge of peace talks with Saudi Arabia before October 7th. And, Qatar has obviously become an interesting force in all of this. And I'm just wondering what you see, Asaf, playing out short-term, long-term, Saudi Arabia's role, Qatar's role, how that figures into the issue with Hezbollah in the north, and then the weirdness, as you said, of the Houthis in the south. What does this look like, obviously now, but what do you think in the long term this can look like?
Well, now everything is unstable. And up till now, if I had to assess the behavior of the Abraham Accords partners of Israel, they are doing a surprisingly good job of not making things hotter. As you could have expected, it wouldn't be very surprising if one of them lost their stuff and went on a rant, and they haven't. And they're under pressure to do that. So we should appreciate that. I think the Abraham Accords are a wonder, a game changer, something that if you told me a year before they happened could happen, I'd say you're crazy. And they are the biggest potential for a regional change. They are a regional change. And I have no doubt that the Iranian incentive to start and back October 7th was the heating up of the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
For sure.
Okay, so someone told me one thing which I liked this week, and I said I'm going to quote that, and that is that we always say, when we're asked, what are the objectives of this war? We automatically say, destroy Hamas, bring back the hostages. Well, what more than that? Also, destroy Hezbollah, de-weaponize or demilitarize Gaza, de-radicalize the Palestinians as a people. And someone said to me, no, the biggest objective of this war should be to continue signing agreements in the Abraham Accord. If you have an agreement with Saudi Arabia, that's the biggest lose for Iran, bigger than any Hamas-oriented decision. Go full ahead in trying to create those agreements. And because of the situation with the Palestinians, because of the sensitivity around the world, it is the most important role America has in our region is securing the continuation of these agreements, which I believe, unless something over-dramatic happens, are close to happen and will happen, and I hope so.
You mean with Saudi Arabia?
I mean with Saudi Arabia. Qatar is very different. We have a very different relationship than you do with Qatar.
Yep.
We view them very differently than you do. I think it's important that America has a relationship with Qatar that we can benefit from during the war as a mediator. But if you look at Qatar's influence on the region, it's not a positive, it's more negative than positive in respect to Israel and Hamas and terror. The college campuses, there's a piece in Israeli media about how essentially everything you see on college campuses in America today started 10 to 15 years ago by Hamas, with Qatari money, but by Hamas. It was Hamas organized organizations. They were outside the campus, then inside the campus. What is now Students for Justice in Palestine was started by Hamas leaders with Qatari money and with people that sat in Israeli prisons for terror and have extremely successfully, for political reasons, used anti-Semitism to create alliances that now showcase young, white, privileged Americans that have no geographical knowledge and are chanting globalize the Intifada as if it's a liberation, which it's not. And I want to tell you why it's not. And I want you to know this because you need to say this to people. It's true that there is an Israeli presence in the West Bank. It's true that we control the border for Gaza. But we control the border for Gaza in what the world calls an occupation out of self-defense. We've been saying that and no one listened up until October 7th. Now it's easier to explain that. If we don't control that border, it'll be October 7th every day. It's basically us pushing them from coming into Israel and killing us. Every time in the past 17 years where it was calm in Gaza, the blockade was lifted, 16,000 Gazans would come in daily to Israel to work. Our dream was for them to create an economy and flourish and leave us the hell alone. Every time someone in the world wanted to make peace with Israel, it took 3 minutes. Egypt, Jordan, the Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, the Oslo Accords, the disengagement from Gaza. Every time we had an opportunity, we have had good prime minister, good leadership. We've had bad leadership. We've had leadership I agree with. We've had constructive ones and disruptive ones. We've never had someone on the other side willing to make concessions to try and live side by side in peace. and to man up to them and to stand behind them. Ever. And the gap between how much most of Israel, well, not all of Israelis are perfect, and we've made many mistakes, and I don't agree with many of the things that have happened in Israel, but generally, the general population in Israel has been willing to do a lot to just be left alone in peace in Israel. And if you know that, and have to see these people demonstrate against our right to be there, it is a shared frustration that we share.
Thank you. Let's talk about the hostages for a moment, because I don't think we can have a program and not talk about 93 days, nearly 100 this weekend. What do you think? Obviously the world, the Jewish world, has come together in keeping attention and focus on the hostage situation. What do you think will happen with the hostages in the near future, Asaf? Any ideas?
Look, I appreciate my opinion more than anyone. But even I don't think I can really know what would happen with the hostages in the future. I will say that everyone Everyone comes out of this war with different images glued to his brain. And for me, one of them, every time I saw people tear down the pictures of hostages, I thought to myself, there is no other example in the world where people would walk by a picture of a kidnapped person and tear it down. I mean, if you talk about what it means that anti-Semitism is now normalized and proud, it's that extent is extreme violence. Extreme. There's a I think she's 18 years old or 19-year-old Naama Levi, which is one of the most famous hostages because she has a picture of her pants are full of blood when she's taken into a car. And her mom came to New York, I think a month ago or 2 months ago, to speak, maybe at the UN. And there was a protest against the mom. Think about your daughter being sexually abused and kidnapped, and people protesting against your right to stand up for her. It's in that aspect, psychologically, it's Holocaust-like anti-Semitism. Because they stand in front of your face and they say, we understand this is what you're going through. We don't care. It's okay. We can live with that. It's crazy. And I don't remember a Western civilization case of kidnapping as large as October 7th of civilians. Large and also not organized, because half of them were kidnapped not by Hamas, but just by Gazans that came in, kidnapped them, wanted to sell them to Hamas. And they use them till this day for psychological torture. The kind of clips that they release about them, and they do it for a right reason, because it's the one thing no society can stomach. When you see a video of them, you're willing to pay any price. They suddenly become real. They're a face. Each one of their 1,200 people were murdered on October 7th. But each one of the hostages, you now have an emotional relationship because you've been with them, you've seen them on TV, you've seen their families, you understand. Sometimes you know their families because Israel is small, right? Everyone in Israel knows someone. And Hamas knows that. So we're in this very, very challenging situation in which it's hard to say this, it really is not in their best interest to speak about them all the time. It's not in the hostages' best interest that people protest. Now, if I had a relative in captivity, I'd protest all day. It's not criticism about the people protesting. I'm just saying that it's a very big challenge to manage a hostage deal in these kind of terms. So and it's reached a point where we so want them out that Hamas maybe would be afraid to let them all out. It's a horrific power dynamic. I would never bet how it will end. I just pray that they all come back, and I wear this and I go to the protests to strengthen the families. And it could have been any one of us. And Israel has an army that's you're drafted into. It's not a choice, right? So almost every Israeli goes to the army. And when you're done with the army, you keep going as a reserve soldier. So there are people like me, my brother-in-law, for example, that was redrafted at the age of 43, even though he's a real estate guy, into combat to fight in Gaza to try and get other civilians that are just, he's now a drafted civilian, they're hostage civilians, to try and get them out, to try and secure them. So everyone is emotionally involved in this. The world sees civilians and soldiers differently. But in Israel, all of the older hostages were soldiers. Half of the soldiers inside Gaza are civilians. It's all mixed together, and it's all a very kind of shared destiny situation. But it's making, this I'm saying from an objective as a side, it's the hardest psychological thing that's happened in this war. And all we can do here is pray.
So to wrap up with our last question. Last 75 years, obviously we, as Dan mentioned in the beginning, we celebrated 75 years of Jewish sovereignty in Israel. And it's this unique moment in time when, if you look at the American Jewish community, there has never been a time in history when we've seen more success of a Jewish people than the last 75 years of Jews in America. And we have a thriving state of Israel. And October 7th happened, and I think it's caused all of us to reflect and question, our very existence as Jews in this country, what it means for Israel. And I think we've all been struggling with that really significantly. Both our success, how do we use that success? And ultimately, I guess the question that I have for you hopefully will be one that ends a little bit on a positive note, because it's really hard to talk about the world today and not be caught up in all that's wrong. But I guess the question is, what do you think our Jewish future looks like, both in the United States and in Israel? Which is meant to be a positive question.
It'll be positive and it'll be short, because I kind of answered that before. I think it's a very, very dramatic, very pivotal time for the Jews, both in Israel and around the world. It is a coming to terms with things that have been happening for years, from a political point of view, from a social point of view, from a military point of view. And as long as the West survives, because we are a promo, right? If you zoom out, we're a little dot in a big dynamic between the United States and Europe and Russia and China and Iran, and we're kind of caught in the middle as a trailer. We have to win, the world has to win, the free world has to win, and we represent that. So there are huge, immense forces trying to explain that we don't represent that. But we all know that we represent it. I have a friend, I'll end on that, unless you have any questions. I have a friend, he's a very successful stand-up comedian. He's not Jewish, in America. And I met him a few weeks ago, and he said, I started out, looked at all my friends, and kind of was sympathetic. I was a ceasefire guy, sympathetic to innocent lost lives. And then I decided I need to learn about this. And I took 2 weeks of my life, and instead of drinking margaritas on a beach, I sat and read and listened. And now that I am fully informed, I'm happy to tell you I can't be anything but pro-Israel. And it's because we're right. If people are and are willing to educate themselves, which is a lot to ask, because we live in times where people aren't willing to do either of them.
They live in sound bites.
They live in sound bites on TikTok, and yeah. And at the end of that road, because we're right, and because of our history, we might go through, this is a big test, but I'm sure we can win it. I'm sure we can win it, and I'm sure we will win it, and I think that it's an awakening call, and I think we're going to come out of it stronger. We might have less friends, we might lose a few on the way, we might bleed on the way, but this is not going to be the third time Beit HaMikdash, or what everyone thought, it was 70 years every time, and this is the third. It's not going to be that. Is that a good note to end on?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you one last question. I know I said that was the last one, but sure. Is there anything else that you want to share with our crowd tonight that I haven't asked you? It's been a lot of questions.
Do you want to know which cheesecake I chose? Because there are like 50 kinds, and no one asked.
It did actually cross my mind.
Your mind isn't blowing up just from thinking of what it was?
I'm assuming you had cheesecake.
But which one? Have you ever been to Cheesecake Factory?
Of course.
So which one?
I bet you're like an Oreo.
I am an Oreo guy, but I didn't take Oreo because I'm trying to be on a diet. So there was one that was like 100 calories less, and I took that one. It was only 1,500 calories instead of 1,600. And it wasn't as good, by the way.
Well,
it was
the caramel. It
was a caramel cheesecake. It wasn't as good as the Oreo cheesecake.
Was it just cheesecake for lunch, or was there anything else?
No, there was. Oddly enough, I read the menu is longer than a book.
That's right.
I read the menu for an hour, and then I chose a Korean chicken dish. Yeah.
Well, we'll gladly have you back in Rochester anytime.
Thank you.
I will take you to Cheesecake Factory anytime.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate your time, and we look forward to having you back for our next program.